podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today on what is now our 28th episode. And today we have a very special guest on the show, and his name is Steve Hall. Now, Steve is the owner and co-founder of Revive Stronger, which is both an online coaching business and also a highly renowned evidence-based podcast here in the health and fitness community. Now, Jack and I have been huge fans of Steve's work for a number of years now, and we are absolutely thrilled to have him on the show. And we are quite certain that many of the listeners will be well aware of Steve's name too. So thanks so much for joining us today, Steve.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's incredibly humbling to hear you guys having followed me for years. I feel like my content has only just become okay, and it's kind of like I'm a little bit embarrassed that you saw some of the old stuff, but we have to start somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, and especially because last year we both competed, and especially like on our big drives to placements, because we're student dietitians back then, and we can safely say that your podcast, you and Pascal and all your guests, like helped get us through those dieting weeks. So yeah.
Yeah, Mike for sure.
Mike is hilarious to another level. I don't even know where he comes out with it. He's full of knowledge, but then is somehow a comedian at the same time.
Yeah, the perfect balance. Cool. So we have some just general questions for you, Steve, about yourself before we get into the more, I guess, things related to health and fitness. So the first question is, tell us a bit about yourself and what got you started in the health and fitness industry.
Cool. So yeah, it's funny, if I really dial it all the way back, I didn't really know much about kind of nutrition and training or anything until the first time I remember finding out about nutrition was, I think, in like sixth form. And I think I was like 16 years old or something. And my girlfriend at the time was like, I don't know, she was into like trying to lose some weight or whatever it might be, and calories and things. And she used to like look at me and be like, how are you eating that? That's got like so many calories in, or something like this. And that's where I think my first like awareness came. And then at that time, I also was like starting to go to the gym with friends. You kind of do it as part of like school. And also I saw some of my friends go, and I was kind of like, oh, I want to go. And so then kind of got the bug a little bit. And I used to do like dumbbell days and then like cable days. And just that was my split. It was like cables and then dumbbells, which probably in some ways wasn't the most awful split. It was better than some things you could have done. But I seriously didn't know what I was doing at all. But that's where the first kind of like interest spawned, was just through friends and just that awareness there. So then I just started going. I didn't have any idea of plans. I didn't really do any research particularly. You just go and do what your friends are doing. And I got somewhere, but I was never like a hyper responder. I think if I had been, I probably would have got into bodybuilding seriously a lot earlier, because I would have been like, oh, well, like, look, I can actually do something here. So I then went to university, and I was at the same time doing loads of sports. I've always been really interested in like football, running. I did some rowing at university as well. I was terrible at rowing. I really wanted to be good at rowing. I was terrible at rowing. Just don't have the like proportions for it and everything like that. And then also at that time, whilst I was at university, I was the kind of where the initial bodybuilding real interest spawned was during my second year. I was, like I said, I was into running, and I was on one of the normal runs I would do around campus. I think it was like 10 kilometers or something. And I used to do this like, I don't know, at least once a week. And I had my old Garmin, like heart rate monitor, my Garmin watch on. So I was like racing against myself. You could have like, it was like a shadow on the watch where you could see like what your past time was. So I could see that I was like on for a good time. And this is something about myself is, I think, probably why I'm okay at bodybuilding, or at least like living that lifestyle, is I'm very stubborn, really want to kind of push hard and always beat myself. And I really thrive off that. So I saw this, and so I wanted to go and beat myself. So I was running as fast as I could and coming towards my flat. And I was literally probably within the last 2 minutes of being kind of home and dry and kind of resting. But at some traffic lights, they were flashing amber, and I stupidly didn't look, and I just launched as you do when you're trying to beat your personal best, and it's just not a safe time to do so. And then having gone, looked right, and there was a big old white van coming, and unfortunately got hit by the van and messed up his windscreen. He might have been going too fast, don't really know, but I ended up knocking my head, and that head injury landed me in hospital for almost a month. And in that time, it was pretty scary. If anyone's kind of been, it's a kind of combination of being very, very, you guys have just competed, so you kind of know what it's like when you're down at those depths, kind of, you're dieted like that, but you're also like really underslept and just feel awful. Like I had immense brain fog. The time, I don't even know where it went. I can't remember really eating. I can remember for a long time, even after the accident, I had like no taste. I couldn't really smell things. I don't remember like even going to like the bathroom during hospital and things. So my body just was in a really bad place. And I lost a lot of weight during that period of time whilst I was in hospital recovering as well. What ended up happening, they think at least, they still don't really know, is I bruised my pituitary gland, which is kind of like controls lots of kind of hormones within the body. And that ended up me coming out with like seriously low testosterone, but more was to the point was my electrolyte balance was really poor. So my sodium levels were kind of at a point where I could seizure if I wasn't careful with like my fluid intake. So I was on like fluid restrictions, taking various medicine to try and control my electrolyte balance. And after many months, kind of recovered that. And at that same time, this is where I was like, I haven't really got the confidence to want to go running anymore. Kind of knocks you a little bit when that sort of thing happens.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, literally. And then I've never been the most confident person, but having had that accident, it then really put me off like putting myself out there in terms of like team sports. And so this is where I was like, the only place of like saving grace was the gym, and I could just go into the gym and push myself there. So that's what I did. I ended up like researching a little bit. I came across probably the wrong resources at first. It was not bodybuilding.com, but it was a different like forum space, and like meal plans and people put me on masses of high protein, masses of high calories. In fact, I was probably eating similar calories to what I am now, but I kind of was out of hospital at just over 130 pounds. So like I lost, I think over 20 pounds when I was in hospital. So I lost a lot of weight during that time, and I was eating way too much for my body weight and for what I was doing. And so I gained a load of weight very quickly, and I came up to 190 pounds within like the year. I just gained it so fast. And at the same time, I was weight training, so I had to gain some muscle mass, but not a huge amount because I still didn't really know what I was doing. I was just training very hard with poor technique. I actually did get some injuries during that period of time, one of which I still have today. But it is what it is. We all learn from it. So during that time, when I hit that like peak body weight, I was still really not happy. But this was more like physically unhappy with how I looked. I was kind of like, I'm bigger, but just now I'm like bigger and fatter. I didn't really feel like I was in any good sort of shape. And I wasn't in any good sort of shape, really. So at that time, I also noticed I developed like hard lumps underneath my nipples. So I was worried it was something much worse than what it was. It was gynecomastia in the end, which is due to imbalances of estrogen to testosterone. And this is where I found out my testosterone levels were at an all-time like low, and I was prescribed TRT. So I had to use some gel, which I rubbed on my chest to bring up my testosterone levels, and it made a huge difference. Immediately, like within the week, I felt like a new person. My energy levels were up. I felt just far better in life, and I started actually growing like chest hair, facial hair. I started like actually turning into a man, I guess. And this is like 21 years old. So yeah, it was great. And at that time, though, I'd obviously developed this passion of bodybuilding, and as I was educating myself, coming across better and better resources, like everyone does, they dig into this stuff. Anyone listening to this has probably gone through that journey where they start off with like the forums, which aren't very helpful. Then they maybe come across someone like Lyle McDonald, body recomposition. That's something I was reading like every single day, digesting his information. I came across Matt Ogus, and then he led me to Eric Helms, 3DMJ. And so I was like, oh, wow, like this natural bodybuilding thing's really cool. But I was like, now I'm on testosterone replacement therapy. Like, how can I like do this? So I asked, after about a month of being on the therapy, I asked if I could come off and see if I could sustain healthy levels, because if I wanted to compete in future, that's what I wanted to do. And probably stupidly stubborn in that sense, like health is most important. But I came off and I managed to sustain a level that the doctor was happy for me to kind of go with. And the doctor wasn't he didn't think I would be able to. I bring this up because I hope, at least, and I partly put it towards bodybuilding for like kind of like saving me in that sense. Like it made me healthier. Like I built the muscle, I took care of my nutrition, I made myself a much healthier person after the accident, where I could have gone in a really bad way. It gave me direction, it gave me focus, and it allowed me to improve my body to where it is now. So I did then compete. I actually remember emailing Eric Helms, asking him, like, can I compete? Because I took testosterone replacement therapy, and he was like, what was he going to say? He didn't really know. He doesn't know the UK scene that well. He just said to me, like, whatever happens, you will be able to compete. Like, just keep your head there. And so I then competed in 2014. So that's when I did my first shows, and it was like a lot of people's first time. It wasn't particularly great. I got in really good shape. I was very happy with it, but I didn't do it in the best way. I was really not in a good place during that period of time, but that's when I caught the bug. And ever since then, like when I transitioned during that period of time, kind of finished uni, I managed to get my degree, and I also like went into office jobs. But I had this like bodybuilding the bug was there, and I wanted to learn this. So as I was doing these other jobs, I did personal training qualifications on the side. So I did those on the weekend, studied. And so then I just took the plunge to do one-on-one PT, which I did for a really short period of time. So a lot of people probably aren't aware that I even did it, but I did it for like not even a year quite, because during that time I was also developing and doing my bodybuilding. And one-on-one PT when you're in contest prep is super hard. I have a lot of respect for people who do that because it was killer. And again, like I said, I didn't like have diet breaks, didn't really have many refeeds. Like I was just so dead to the world during that period of time. So it made me focus on online coaching because there was people within the gym from surrounding schools who saw me transforming my physique, saw that I knew kind of what I was doing, and they wanted some help. So I was like, I'd seen 3DMJ doing this kind of online coaching thing. I was like, okay, maybe I can write you a program, give you some nutritional help. And that's where the online side then started growing. And I transitioned my one-on-one PT down and built up my online side, started getting people results, sharing it. There was lots of referrals initially. And then ever since then, I moved out into London with my girlfriend, who I met at during my office work. And I had to then like put everything into content, earning enough money to be able to kind of pay for rent and everything in London. And that forced me to really work hard at that. And ever since then, it's just grown upwards to what it is today. And I'm astounded by it. So sorry, that was a bit of a long story, but that's kind of the background.
Yeah, that was amazing. And I think the great thing is that a lot of our listeners may have tuned in to these later episodes and they don't know you from the beginning. So, and yeah, what an amazing journey from that injury to where you are today. And yeah, I think a lot of people can find some benefit in what you've done. And how did you come across the name Revive Stronger as well?
I was just going to say, so that kind of gives you the name, I guess, in some ways. I initially came up with just Revive because I was like, I've revived myself better. And I called it like Revive with Stephen Hall. I did actually have, what other names? I went through like the Fitness Hub was a name I had like ages ago. But yeah, eventually moved towards Revive Stronger, which was more of a move once Pascal came on board, because I didn't really want it to be about me anymore. I wanted it to be about something bigger, which is what I'm hoping we're slowly doing, is becoming like a bit of a brand and something to help more people. But that's where my passion came from, because it's all about like, you can revive stronger. Anyone can come from a poorer place and get themselves to a better place if they control their nutrition, control their lifestyle and training to a certain degree. Everyone can do it, even if you're in a really bad place right now.
And yes, Steve, I think that you've just done like a phenomenal job of that, because you are literally networking people from all over the world. You know, you've got Mike and Gabrielle, and you've got, you know, these people down from Australia, JPS Fitness, and, you know, you are holding conferences and you're interviewing professionals from all over the world, and you are truly helping people through your podcast. It's just amazing.
Thank you. And I'm honored to just even be able to do it. The other day, I was just thinking like, this is really weird how I'm like just talking to someone like Eric or Mike is like a friend, when like Eric is someone who was just like, he was a celebrity to me when I was first just like learning about bodybuilding. And then I had someone like Lyle even come on the podcast, and like having discussions back and forth with Lyle, whether or not they're positive all the time is another story. But to have that is just strange. It's just crazy to me, because as someone who was like, I don't know, 20, 21 years old, reading his articles, just being like blown away. And then never did I think like a few years later, I'd be interviewing him on a podcast. It's insane.
Yeah, that is really incredible. And yeah, I hope that one day we can sort of follow in your footsteps. And yeah, we can especially emphasize with the name change, the name of the business, because like finding something that's relatable to everyone and to you and what you've done as well. Don't want it to be corny so there's a lot of intricacy with that. But yeah, basically going into some more stuff about you, and I think some people will be very interested in this question. So how do you currently structure your own training and nutrition, and how has this changed in recent years?
Cool. So nutrition, I'll start with because I find it to be really simple. I noticed the other day, I was like, I never really put out any content about nutrition. Like often on the podcast, it's training related. On my Instagram, it's training related, because I find we've just come across nutrition has become quite simple for like physique competitors, in that the recommendations for like protein, carbohydrates and fats, which is the most important kind of macro level things you need to focus on, are there, and they're pretty well known and established. So yeah, I shoot for around that like 1 gram of protein per pound. I tend to have a bit more because I'm on so many carbohydrates, and I eat like enough bagels to get like 40 grams of protein in. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, we're with you.
It really adds up. So I end up having quite a bit more protein than what it looks like. I count it all, but I just increase it because there's so many poorer quality proteins coming in. I tend to go for, at the moment, a lower fat approach. So I have 0.3 grams per pound generally, which at the moment is like 60, 70 grams. I will let that come up for flexibility purposes. Like during my off season, I'm not too stressed about it. And then the rest comes from carbohydrates. So I'm on like 600 grams of carbohydrates, which is a lot. Right now it's more than I really want to be consuming. But that hasn't changed a whole lot since I first got into kind of bodybuilding and learning about this. And that's how we've known about nutrition for quite a long time, I think. I've just taken more care of kind of nutrient timing, I think. Especially at the moment, I train twice per day. So I split my workout into 2, basically. I don't do 2 like completely huge workouts or anything. But with that, I have to take more care of kind of like carbohydrate timing and fiber timing, fat timing, because otherwise I'm just going to end up feeling awful when I get into the gym. My stomach's going to be bloated and I'm going to not be able to put my belt on or something like this. So I have to take care of that. But it hasn't changed a whole lot. When I did first get into things like years ago, it was like terrible. I just followed like the complete bro diets, and it was all about like clean bulking, but clean meant you just ate like healthy foods essentially. But that didn't, it was just the calorie surplus that led to a lot of fat gain in the end, which is where it comes from. So the only thing, I guess the biggest thing I've changed this off season, at least compared to other ones, is accepting and being a bit more assertive about weight gain. Because in the past, and I think probably a lot of people would relate to this, once you get to like a certain surplus or a certain number of calories and you're a certain body weight, you just feel very comfortable. And you can quite often just maintain for months and months and still train hard. And you're probably gaining some muscle, but you're certainly not maximizing your chances via doing that. So now I'm a bit more like, I actually want to see the scale going up and just accept that. I've also let my body weight come up higher than previous years. So I think my last off season, I handicapped myself at 185 pounds, whereas I'm closing in on like 200 now. And my physique looks much better for it. And I feel better for it. I'm experiencing kind of some things that I haven't experienced before in terms of like just zero food focus, which is really, really refreshing, to be honest. And then, yeah, dieting, the biggest thing I think I changed in recent years was just making sure to have diet breaks, not just diet forever, and not just have like a single refeed during the week, more so collect those refeeds over many weeks and put them into a single week. So I had a whole week of kind of maintenance calories that seemed to really, really help progression, especially kind of like the week effect is just so much larger than just having that single day. And I think my psychology was better as well in terms of like, just you don't look forward to the end of the week every day, every day almost, because you have that refeed. You're in the diet, kind of go, and then you have a whole break and then you go again. Those are probably the biggest things I've changed with my nutrition. Training wise, I do follow the volume landmarks from Mike Israetel. So your listeners might be aware of those, where it's kind of, he came up with MRV initially, which is like the most volume you can do and recover from. But I am very big on finding minimum effective volume for people. because then you can, anything more than that is like a bonus. Minimum effective volume, we know you're growing. Anything more than that, you're growing at a slightly faster pace. So for myself, I start at the minimum effective volume. For all my muscle groups at the moment, I don't do any specialization phases that a lot of people do when they get more advanced. And I take myself through the like maximal adaptive volume. And eventually I end up hitting MRV, which is normally after about 4 or 5 weeks, deload and then repeat. And I focus on kind of the 5 up to 30 repetition range. That's a recent change. I was more so focusing on like 5 to 20 at most. Even I rarely even go to 20. It's more like 5 to 15. But recently, with the new evidence that's kind of coming out that you can go as high as 30 repetitions.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's something I've been trialing out, and it's fun. It's different.
As long as your cardiovascular system doesn't give out, then it's generally all right.
Yeah, not recommended for squats, but on leg press, they can be like the pump you can get on a leg press sometimes is killer. So I utilize that. I also use reps in reserve. So at the start of that mesocycle, I'm also starting out with like the minimum relative intensity, which is probably 5 reps in reserve, but I think that's very hard to judge. So I go for 3 to 4, and then I let that kind of drop down as I progress through reps or load through the weeks, eventually getting very close to failure. I tend not to hit like true failure. I tend to just hit a point at which maybe I can't do another good rep because I just don't see the benefit of going past that point. So yeah, that's what my training nutrition looks like at the moment, at least.
And you mentioned that you're currently, you've been training twice a day now for quite a while. Can you tell us about your experience with that compared to training once per day?
So the biggest thing that it's allowed me to do is have high quality volume. So if I was doing, say, for a long time, I was doing like push-pull legs, and in a push session, you'd have your like chest work, and then you go into like delts and triceps. So rather than doing that, I'd end up doing my chest work and then going and doing like delts and triceps later. And so that allows for, I normally have about 4 hours between. So rather than the fatigue that I have from the chest work and like my triceps are a little bit fatigued, I can go into doing the chest and delt work fresh. So the quality is slightly better. So what might have been kind of 3 to 4 reps in reserve when after my chest work is now a better performance because I've just got that time and I've replenished glycogen and I'm in a better position. So it's allowed for a better quality volume. And then eventually, I think it's allowed for a slightly higher MRV. So total volume has been a bit higher, which is basically the big benefit of higher training frequencies is you can spread your volume over a few more sessions so you can get more in. So by splitting up twice in the day, I get a little bit extra. It's not like night and day, but it's really great for me because I work at home, I work for myself, and so it splits up my day quite nicely as well. And it gets me out of the flat a little bit more. So it's I don't have at the moment any clients doing it, so I don't often program it for people unless they can truly commit to it, and it's something that really complements them. Because it's certainly not for everyone. It's not a must by any means.
Well, yeah, you've definitely shown to us since you finished competing last that you've literally blown up. So yeah, your approach to training and nutrition is great, and it's really encouraging for us to see you implement all those evidence-based guidelines and for us to see that they work like firsthand in your case. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
That's good to hear. So, I'm hoping it's not just fat.
No, Steve, you seriously made amazing progress. Yeah. Like, we cannot wait to see you on stage again one day. Like, I think the whole world's kind of excited. That actually kind of leads nicely into our next question.
Yeah, so what are your future plans for competing? Do you have any lifetime goals you would like to achieve in regards to bodybuilding?
Cool. So at the moment, I'm very excited also to diet down. I'm kind of sick of not dieting at the moment, which is a surprise. Like, I never thought I'd really ever say that. So at the moment, I have planned about 2 more months left of like my off season. And then I will be doing like a diet before the diet, if people are kind of familiar with that kind of phrasing from 3DMJ, where I'll get probably 3 months of dieting done, get fairly lean, where I look like I could start then a proper contest prep and get lean for 2020, which is what I'm kind of planning to do. So 2 months of off season, do a maintenance during that time as well, call it the primer phase, and then do the diet before the diet, about 3 months, get kind of very lean, do another primer, maintenance period, and allow my kind of metabolism and everything to heal back up, and then, or heal, upregulate, use the right terms. I don't want to say heal. And then, dig for shows during 2020 is kind of the idea. I'm making a judgment call at the end of that first diet to whether or not I think I've either made enough progress to where I'm satisfied that I'll do better than last time, or I'm not sure. But, and in terms of long-term goals, I'd love to say that like I'd love to go pro, but being realistic with my kind of, and I don't want to be, I probably look down on myself too much in this regard, but I don't think I have the best like shape for bodybuilding, and so I think I'll be lucky if I end up going pro, and it will be a case of someone better didn't turn up on the day, which is always what it is. So I just want to be encouraging for other people that they can take their physique very, very far from maybe not the best starting point. That would be the biggest thing for me, is helping other people, rather than necessarily any goals, particularly for myself. My goal for myself is just to keep putting my best foot forward and bring about my best package possible.
Well, in part, I think that's something you've kind of already achieved, Steve.
Good. That's nice to hear.
Yeah, we're both really eager to watch your journey. And yeah, I think in a way, if you come first in a bodybuilding show, it does literally mean that no one else has turned up that's better than you. So
there's always going to be someone that's better.
Yeah, there's the UK scene in particular at the moment. I don't know how much you guys would keep an eye on it, but it's just the quality just keeps. It's probably the same with you guys. The quality just keeps getting better and better and better. Probably down to us putting out good information, and then people are getting better. It's like, no, should not do this.
Yeah, we say the same about the Australian scene as well. Like, especially this past season. Usually season B in the second half of the year is a bit more competitive, but the season A that's just happened, like some pretty insane physiques, and it is literally just getting better every year. So in all federations. So it's cool. So this is the next question for you. It's about you as a coach. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned during your time as a coach?
Cool. So I think probably the biggest lesson for me as like an online coach, at least, is the importance of face-to-face contact still, or at least like audio contact. Because I initially started, I would not have like consultations. So I'd just like start people up and then I'd just do email with them. Which just really didn't work very well. There's so many words kind of missed between the lines, and you don't get the personality across. You also don't get kind of the emotion across. It's so super important for me to get that connection. So the biggest lesson I had as an online coach is like how important having the initial consultation with the client is, just to get a proper feel for them and them to get a proper feel for you, and have a real deep conversation and get those visual cues. And then our weekly check-ins are visual as well, so they're videos, so someone can talk to the camera, and I find people are just way more able to express their real feelings and emotions, and they also can't hide them, and they also don't want to. Like a good coach is very empathetic, and I think that's something I've kind of fortunately got a lot of, is empathy for people, and so they feel very open and able to speak. Whereas email can be really like, I don't know, just very short, and I think that hurts a lot of people, because personal training, at the end of the day, online coaching is there's still the personal element there. I think there should be for the best results, because it's super important. So yeah, that's probably the biggest lesson I've had as a coach, is how important keeping that personal element, keeping the kind of visual and the audio between the individual there, and because that's the true way to individualize when you are coaching someone.
And that resonates with us as well, because say if you're coaching someone with a contest prep and you say, we're going to be adding in some extra cardio this week, and they just text back saying absolutely ! And then they're dying inside, and you can't really tell. So even from that standpoint, it's so important to be able to hear someone's voice and facial expressions and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it really, really helps to encourage them too, because Jack and I, we meet up with our clients, generally on a weekly to fortnightly basis, and we do posing practice. We take their skin folds, and certainly to actually get to speak to them in person makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Whenever we've had like meetups or we do the seminars and clients come, it's that extra element. You already feel like you know one another because you've obviously spoken a lot, but it's really nice to actually have that personal connection. I agree.
Yeah, it really can help to add energy to it. And so our next question for you is, how have you seen the industry change during your time as a coach?
Interesting question. I think the big, it might be that I've got like blinkers on because I'm in a little bit of like the evidence-based bubble a little bit, but it seems to be more and more evidence is coming out, better information is there, more people are getting hold of it. However, I think there's maybe a lot of people still confused by it. So it's almost like there's too much information for them. Paralysis by analysis is kind of the phrase that comes to mind. And that's actually a lot of people I end up coaching are people who are very invested, love it, but they end up watching like every single podcast that is out there that has someone who seems knowledgeable, and they end up just getting confused by it. So I think it's come to a point where there's way more information that's brilliant, but now it's kind of for the consumers, digesting it has become really, really difficult. So that's something I found has really come in. And then just the prevalence of like social media, Instagram, when I first was on there, like it really wasn't a big thing for us or for me, whereas now it's like it's free marketing, and it's huge, it's important. And now there's people on there with hundreds of thousands of followers who are doing online coaching and things, and that's exploded. Again, when I was probably lucky in a sense coming to do online coaching, there wasn't that many people doing it at the time, at least as far as I was aware. Whereas now it's just like there's so many, and every single personal trainer is now doing it almost, whereas in the past it was kind of like not really. So that's probably the biggest change I've seen. And I think overall it's positive, but there are obviously quite a bit of negatives associated with that as well.
Yeah, and I feel with especially Instagram, you can easily get stuck into like a little bubble. So whether that, because I remember when I first went on Instagram, like probably wasn't the most evidence-based people I was following, and then all my Discover feed was full of non-evidence-based, but now it's like done a complete 180, sorry. So
yeah, it's pretty amazing. If you follow the right people, Instagram actually can be a pretty amazing educational platform if you follow correct people like yourself and Eric Helms and, Gabrielle and everyone like this. But yeah, again, you can be misled for sure.
Yeah, it's almost got to the point where science has become a marketing tool, and it doesn't matter if you're using it right or wrongly. And if you are a layperson and you don't understand, if someone's got like they said this is science based, then they just believe it and they trust it now because it's like, oh yeah, it's got science in there. So it's tricky because people are now using it the wrong way.
Yeah, apple cider vinegar comes to mind.
Oh yeah.
So we'll start off with the listener question. So the first question is by Corinne, and this is, I think, a good question to start off with. Would love if Steve could explain how the maintenance primer phase works.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So we just obviously released this as a book, and it's actually, we're super blown away by how many people have just picked it up and really enjoyed it. It's been incredible because as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the least sexy thing there probably is out there in many ways. So we try and kind of make it a bit sexy by calling it the primer phase. So in short, the origins of this really came from my kind of learning from Mike Israetel. I'd always come across like diet breaks and like 2-week-long periods of time, but I'd never really heard of like a true period of just pure maintenance. Not just maintenance from a nutritional standpoint, but also from a training standpoint, where you are just looking to just hold on to what you've got. And I didn't really understand the rationale behind it fully, and I didn't really accept it because you always want to be progressing as whether or not that's fat loss or muscle gain. But it really acts as something that can propel you forward, which is why I ended up terming it the primer phase. Because as we move away from homeostasis, which is like a place our body likes to be, whether or not that's fat loss or muscle gain, the body kind of resists harder and harder. We get adaptive resistance building up. We know this with like any biological thing. When you kind of like you scratch yourself and then you get a scab, you get scarring, the skin there is a bit tougher, and the body resists adaptation. Or even better, going outside and getting a tan, kind of you get the build up of the tan, and so you can kind of protect yourself against the sunlight even more. So we know this thing happens, and it happens with dieting. We experience that firsthand. Everyone listening will be able to kind of feel this in terms of like just diet fatigue factors building up. So you get more hungry, you get less energetic, your libido comes down, you're thinking about food all the time. It makes dieting harder and harder, and your actual energy expenditure drops as well. So you get to a point where the body's just resisting you so hard that it's is it really worth? Is the efficiency of keeping dieting there? Maybe you're going to binge and fall down and kind of go back. And this often happens with yo-yo dieting. It's still prolific out there. So then this is where a maintenance primer phase would come in. You take calories up to maintenance and you hold that new lower body fat settling point. Settling points are kind of, they're not a definite, they're more of a theory whereby kind of if you're normally very, very lean, then holding a lean physique is fine. This is kind of your homeostasis. But if you've been quite high in terms of body fat and you've settled there and this is very comfortable for you, then when you diet down and you're leaner now, it can be really hard. So by just taking a period of time to maintain, it can be really great to allow that settling point to somewhat settle at a lower level. Same with building muscle, So after kind of long periods of time where you're building muscle, not only are you probably in a surplus, you're gaining some fat, which is its own sort of anabolic resistance in a sense, because P ratios, so the ratio of fat to muscle gain kind of shifts out of favor as you get a little bit fatter. And also as you train with higher volumes, you just get more fatigue built up. So everyone would have experienced this over like months and months of higher volume training. You just get more niggles. You don't get as good like pumps and feel from training. There's elements of buildup of AMPK, which is like a more so catabolic marker. mTOR kind of drops. I'm not going to try and say that I know everything about those things, and they're very kind of theoretical more so, or mechanistic ideas. But it makes sense that these sort of things happen, and definitely we do get that resistance towards kind of building muscle, building up. And so by taking a period of time again to maintain, to prime, we resensitize ourselves to training volumes. We need less. So our minimum effective volume, which I talked about before, that starts rising as we start training with higher and higher volumes, because it needs to as the body resists kind of adapting and growing. So by taking a period of lower volume, going through the primer phase, we allow this to come back down. We also allow a lot of the things that like build up in terms of fatigue and niggles to really kind of recover. Deloads and everything are great. They kind of help in many ways, just like a diet break would help with dieting and the kind of adaptive resistance that builds up with that. But after a while, maybe 3 to like 6 months, there becomes a time where it's just like, okay, I need a longer period just to hold off. I very much, as an analogy, put this like during the working week, we have obviously evenings off. We're not working all through the day because we need a bit of rest. Then we get our weekends, which are great. They're kind of like our deload and days off. But after a while, we need a holiday. We need a longer break. And this is kind of like the primer phase to the macrocycle of kind of building or losing fat, or building muscle and losing fat, sorry. So that's kind of, where it came from and what it's all about. And it's just been really helpful for like long-term periodization and consistent gains and consistent fat loss for people and our clients.
Yeah, Jack and I are definitely going to have to get our hands on that book, and we will certainly put the link to it down in the description box below so that people have the link too. It should be great to read, and I'm aware that you've been working on that for quite some time now, so it's very exciting that it's finally released.
Yeah, also, we just thought, we've been talking about it a lot, and a lot of people have questions a lot of the time. So just like, all right, let's actually make a resource, let's package it up. And having written it, it was really nice actually putting all the thoughts into one place. And it's like, like it resold me on how important these phases really are. It's like, I need to do one. I'm looking forward to actually doing my next one.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, you'll definitely be the man to know how to do it.
So moving on to our next question, which is by John Schultz. Maximum amount of lower back loading movements you'd include in one mesocycle?
So this is a great question. And I think it's obviously, like a lot of things, is individual. People who require less training volume or can do less training volume probably have a lot more ability to put in more of these bigger compound lifts that are going to load the lower back. So like bent over rows, deadlifts, squats. These axial loading style of lifts, they really fatigue us heavily. They create a lot of fatigue, but you also get a load of muscle growth from them, because like a deadlift almost hits every single muscle. The squat, a great compound lift, bent over rows again. But for someone who's maybe got plenty of time and they've got a lot of volume to hit, they want to pick more favorable potentially movements that create a lot of stimulus with less fatigue, because a deadlift, whilst it's very stimulating, it's also very fatiguing, especially if you're quite strong. So it might not be the best lift for someone who is quite advanced, has lots of time to put into the gym, and therefore can afford to maybe do more sets on something that's less fatiguing but creating more stimulus for them. Whereas if someone's a bit newer, they're only training 3 days per week, they probably want a lot of these bigger lifts, but probably load the lower back, but that's not really a limiting factor for them because their volume requirements and their ability to do that volume is so much lower. So for myself personally, and then it's just individual based. So some people just have like a low back of steel that can just deal with it, whereas other people are just, it's very, very weak. So it's difficult to say exactly. Yeah, I don't know if I can't put a number on it.
Yeah, it's difficult to quantify.
That general, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good explanation, actually, of saying if you have more volume to play around with, you can probably include other movements like a bent over row or a T-bar row, and not having to rely on something like a deadlift. And I know you personally stopped deadlifting and you're doing this stiff legs now, aren't you?
Yeah, I trialed putting deadlifts back in because everyone loves deadlifts, and it's really cool to feel really strong. And I'm fairly strong at deadlifts, but they just wipe me. Like I do my set, like 3 sets of deadlifts, and they almost wipe me for my entire session. Whereas with the stiff legs, it's less load on the bar, range of motion for the hamstrings and glutes is a little bit larger. And so I get more stimulus for less fatigue out of that movement. And so for me, it's an absolute winner. And I think a lot of the time for someone who's like intermediate advanced, deadlifting off the floor isn't always kind of the best choice, at least.
Yeah, I agree. But yeah, I won't go into, the listeners all know our personal stories with deadlifting and stuff.
Oh,
so
right.
yeah. So
no injuries, I hope.
Yeah, not anymore, fortunately.
Not for me, but Jack got a bit hurt last year.
Oh no.
Yeah. So like, it's a good question because I have to be careful with my lower back loading and I don't deadlift anymore. So things like that. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question to ask. So moving on to the next question, which is by Nay Francis. What's the maximum number of sets you do for a muscle group per workout session?
Cool. So this has changed recently because there's been, well, actually Mike came over and presented on maximal volume and minimal volume for a muscle group per session. So this looks like it's 3 to 10 is kind of like where things are indicating at the moment. And this isn't like a definite, this is more of a rationale, a theory, a hypothesis, whereby if you do less than 3, you're maybe not stimulating enough to really create a stress response to cause an like recovery response and adaptation. But if you're doing more than 10, potentially the sets past that are now creating excess damage and fatigue and not worth the stimulus that they're providing. So they become almost like junk volume in a sense. Yeah. So that tends to be my kind of limit at the moment. It's like 10 sets for a muscle group for a session. But I have gone over that. And I think it also depends not just on the person, but maybe on the movements you're choosing as well. So if you're doing like, I don't know, squats and a leg press, maybe 10 sets is a pretty good limit because that's 5 sets of each of those potentially, and that's quite a lot. Whereas if it's maybe leg extensions and maybe, I don't know, again, a leg press, then maybe it would be more than that because leg extensions aren't as stimulating and fatiguing as a squat is. So maybe it would go a little bit higher for that person. But I think as a rule of thumb, 10 is a good kind of upper limit for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. And so this next question is from Nay Francois. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it says, how do you structure a macrocycle?
Cool. So I guess this is for hypertrophy because that's all I really do. Powerlifting is long and gone. And so, yeah, for macrocycle for hypertrophy, I would start off with what I would call like standard hypertrophy. This has changed recently, actually. I used to very much do like a standard hypertrophy phase. And I'll explain what that is. And then I'll go into like a standard hypertrophy phase with slightly higher repetition ranges. And then I'll use that and go into a kind of a metabolite phase, which has the last phase, but layers on top metabolite work, and then a primer or a mini cut, and then move forward. But more recently, I've been trialing having more focus on like 6 to 30 repetition ranges. So whereas before I wouldn't include like any of the higher repetition ranges in that first phase, in that first mesocycle, now I might have a focus on kind of the 5 to 10 repetition range with a little bit of 10 to 20 and a little bit of 20 to 30. And then the next mesocycle, focus on the 10 to 20, have a little bit of 5 to 10 and a little bit of 20 to 30. And then in the final mesocycle, or the third mesocycle, have mostly 20 to 30, a little bit of 10 to 20, a little bit of 5 to 10, where you have all of them going through, but you have a focus on one during the period of time. I don't know if either or is better, and we don't even know if periodization is necessarily even needed for bodybuilding, but it kind of makes theoretical rationale or sense in that moving from kind of the lower hypertrophy range towards the higher hypertrophy rep range allows for a little bit more volume each mesocycle, because the higher repetitions tend to allow for more hard sets to be done. And I kind of call hard sets like anywhere within that rep range where you're going 3 to 4 reps in reserve or lower than that. That tends to be how I move through it. So it might be 3 back to back, or you might do 3 or 4, maybe up to 6, depending. And you use the metabolite work a little bit sparingly. So that's anything that basically gets a pump. Might be like myo reps, drop sets, giant sets, supersets, or agonist supersets rather, not kind of antagonist. And then I either drop in a primer phase to kind of resensitize before going through again, or put in a mini cut if it's appropriate for the person, and then go through another round of massing. But they tend to be, I like at least 2 mesocycles of massing together. If that's like the lower limit, up to like probably 6 for someone who's very new.
Awesome. And I do actually have there is another question related to this as well. And it's, how would you basically structure the number of exercises in either a week of training or a session? So say if you have 6 sets of pushing movements to do, would you do 2 sets across 3 exercises, or would you do 2 exercises with 3 sets each, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, cool. So I think for the most, my kind of rule of thumb is 2 to 4 movements per muscle group. I think biceps and like smaller muscle groups could probably go above that if you really wanted to. But I don't think you need more than 2 to 4 for most, but at least 2, because if you've just got one movement, it's really hard to get the volume in, because just using the same movement pattern, I mean, just from a psychological aspect at least, but using the same movement pattern, even if it's in different rep ranges, if your muscle's recovered, but you have to hit it in the same exact way at the same angle, I don't think that's the best for hypertrophy. But if you've got 2, then that can be really nice. So like hamstrings, often I only have 2 because you can get a nice hip hinge in there and a leg curl. So you're kind of hitting the hamstring fully by hip extension and also knee flexion, which is great. But the hamstrings also don't need a huge amount of volume. So 2 exercises sometimes can be enough to get that all in. Whereas for some muscle groups, they're they're kind of more complex rather. So something like the back, the lats splay like all over the place. You also have the rhomboids, the traps. It's quite a big muscle group in that regard. So maybe 4 exercises is going to be more ideal for that sort of muscle group, especially a lot of people can handle more volume with the back. So if you can kind of fit that within more exercises, that sometimes can be more preferable. I think if you're going over like maybe 6 sets for a single exercise within a single session, probably getting a little bit much. Whereas if you can split that between 2 and you do 3 and 3, I think that's great. But if you have too many exercises and you take that to an extreme, then you end up not really getting very good at anything. And you also end up just like moving arbitrarily between exercises throughout the session, and you leave nothing new to come in future. So it's quite nice sometimes once a movement kind of gets stale, you kind of milked it out, it's really not progressing well, or if it's a bit uncomfortable, you can put in some novelty, change that exercise and have a new one. And if you're anything like me and at a commercial gym, you don't have that much choice. There's not a huge amount of variance. Some people have bodybuilding gyms and they have like 6 different leg presses, so they're fine. But for a lot of people, they don't have enough to be able to kind of go through so many exercises in a single kind of week.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful answer, especially, really finding that happy medium with the certain number of exercises you do. I'm just thinking of the shoulders as an example, like picking maybe 3 to 4 shoulder exercises that you would do instead of doing like 10 different exercises for your delts, which is just insane.
And that resonates with me too. And going off we've actually just transitioned into a more bodybuilding style gym, and it really is just night and day with the equipment selection.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm jealous.
So the next question comes from Andrew Hughes, and he asks, ideas for accountability when working alone / without a coach?
Cool. That's a really interesting question. So I think my initial thought is kind of surrounding friends and family, PTs at the gym, just kind of tell them what you're doing, tell your friends and family what you're doing, so that if there's like food around at home and they see you like nibbling at, I don't know, a bowl of peanut M&Ms, and they're like, hey, aren't you on a diet? They can actually help you with that. I think it's good to stay account. I even tell that to my clients who I'm coaching, like, just like tell your girlfriend what you're doing, because if she doesn't know, she's going to try and, I don't know, she thinks she's being nice feeding you like fast food or whatever it might be. Whereas if she knows, then she can hopefully help you. So that's something I definitely would take advantage of. And then I think there's a lot of apps that are really great now. So I think if I want to, my Fitbit can buzz me if I've not done like the steps I need to be doing in a certain period of time. So it can keep you accountable in that regard. I think MyFitnessPal, it gives you like a streak. I think probably you can get that to nudge you as well for what you're doing. So I think and I think even RP have like a diet app now. I bet that I think it actually has some like annoying, not annoying, it has some great reminders for like you should be eating now. Yeah, helpful reminders. So yeah, that can, I think in this day and age, those kind of tools of like the different apps and like it's so great at the moment, but you can always obviously turn them off and you can always lie to yourself. So that is why guys have jobs, because accountability is huge.
Yeah, and I think it'll always come down to yourself and your own integrity. That's always going to be the number one thing, your own self-discipline, and then we can start to rely on like apps and friends and families and that sort of stuff. So yeah,
I always get people when they're thinking to do something and they're not sure about it, I always say, take a moment, ask yourself the question, is this going to take me further towards or further away from my goals? And then normally that's just enough time to be like, don't be an idiot. Like hold it back.
Or I always say, like, how am I going to feel afterwards? Like, because like the worst feeling is when you do something and then you're, oh crap, I wish I didn't do that. Like that's the worst feeling.
So this next question is from Lawrence Greaves. He's one of your big fans over here down in Australia.
Oh, awesome.
So Lawrence has asked, what are your top tips for a productive massing phase? Love your work, Steve.
Oh, okay. So thank you, Lawrence. Top tips. I would say being really consistent with consistency, full stop, really, is probably a big top tip. And that means just like you would in a dieting phase, a lot of people like take it very seriously. They don't miss meals. They're on top of their training. They get their cardio in. I'd use a lot of that mentality and put it towards kind of your massing phase. Make sure you're going and getting your training in. Make sure you're eating your food, because I think food for a lot of people, like I said, for me, it was something I got very complacent on, because when you're fed and your maintenance or even a slight surplus, it's super comfortable. But it at times needs an element of discomfort to create that change, especially if you're like pushing past a body weight that you've never been up to before. For me, like getting above 190 pounds has meant having to push a lot of food. And that might be the case for other people. So I think especially as you get more trained, that can become really important. And I also say just this would go for anyone really, not just massing, but like technique in the gym, form, just super important. Be really careful with that, and don't let yourself kind of ever kind of do cheat reps. Don't break down, keep that really tight. And it doesn't mean like don't train hard, always train hard, but definitely keep technique safe, because if you ever overdo it, or if you like slightly tweak something because you're just being kind of like letting the ego go, getting injured is the worst thing for muscle growth. Like you're just going to set yourself back. Sure. So making sure you take care of that. And I guess in the same line of that, the final one I'd probably say is like recovery is huge. And the biggest thing I've taken a focus on in like the last year is just sleep. If you need like a book to read, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker will just like blow your mind, and you'll be like, all right, I need to nail my sleep. So, and it's quite simple, some of the things that you can do to really help with sleep that I think a lot of people don't currently do. So yeah, sleep, consistency, and keeping that technique really good.
Yeah. Sleep especially resonates with me. If I don't get at least 8 hours, then I'm in trouble. So
yeah.
Yeah, especially when clients are always asking, very complicated questions, and you're like, how much sleep are you getting per night? Like let's address that first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we're wrapping up with our final two questions and finishing with second last one's an important one from Tanya Miller. What's more anabolic, Crocs or 5-finger Vibrams?
I know Tanya, so this is hilarious. I thought this might happen. There's people like wearing Vibrams now, and obviously Jared and Mike are wearing the Crocs, so it's kind of like I have Crocs and I have Vibrams, but I don't.
It's like reps in reserve versus training to failure, I guess.
Yeah, it is. I think for every day, Crocs have got to take it, just because like you can actually wear those. I don't know. I actually have no idea where I'm going. I don't know. I really am struggling.
I think I'd go with the Vibrams, maybe. Yeah.
Vibrams are also really comfortable, but Crocs can be as well. So I'm like, I don't even know. I'll say Vibrams because they're the ones I've got in the flat, whereas my Crocs are back with my parents.
So, and yeah, especially Crocs and socks don't really match either. So, so the last question is one that we finish on each week for the guest. So, what's one interesting thing that you learned this week that you didn't already know?
Cool. So I was, I think because you said this off air, so I was like, what can I think of? And something I was trying to think of something that wasn't just completely useless. So I've been listening to a book on Audible called "You Are Not So Smart," and this is all about like logical fallacies that people have. And it went into one which I actually can't remember what the fallacy was, but it started talking about it, and it was like people will say that men who are dating younger women are like just like or they're like sugar daddies and they're after their money or whatever it might be, and then guys who have like, I don't know what they called them, they're like fake real dolls or something, and they like have those at home and they're disgusting and weird. And then it went into like why this is maybe not a fair judgment to have, and it talked about these beetles that are, I think they're actually in Australia, and they're beetles that end up mating with bottles, these like brown dubby bottles or something, because apparently they look like their ideal mate, but even better. Like they're even more brown, they're even more shiny. And so you find these beetles mating with these bottles, even if they're like being attacked by like ants and things, and they're going to die because they're so like overwhelmed by it. And they're like, now you can understand why men might find these like dolls attractive, and why kind of older men might go for these younger women, because it's like a super stimulant. So yeah, that's the one thing I think we've got the
podcast episode name as well now. Beetles mating with bottles.
Do you guys have these like little brown like beer bottles or something? I think that's what it was.
Yes, we do. And if it's a beetle, then we probably have it in Australia as well. So
yeah. I don't know what's going on in this country. All right. So, Steve, we just want to say a huge thank you for coming on today. Like, we've really enjoyed this, and we're sure the listeners have really enjoyed listening to this as well. And before we head off, please let everyone know, where can they find you and where can they find your work?
Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it as well. Thanks for the great questions. So yeah, if they want to find everything about us, probably just revivestronger.com is where you'll be able to find the podcast. Miguel does some great articles on there as well. And they can find the online coaching there as well if they want to. And then I'm Revive Stronger on Instagram, which is where I'm most active. So if people want to kind of connect with me over there, they absolutely can. Thank you very much. And thank you guys.
All right, wonderful. So guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot, post it to your Instagram stories, tag Steve, tag myself, tag Jack, tag the Bodybuilding Dietitians, and we will catch you next week. See ya.